So this evening, we're going to be talking about loving limits, positive and effective discipline. And there's something I think that all parents have challenges with. I know that we did when we had our 3 children. We struggled with different ways to try and do discipline. And we read some books and tried to follow some of the examples. Some of those things didn't really work for us. So it's important for us to find out what works for us, what works for our children, and to keep some important principles in mind when we're working with children. So it's a good idea to think first of what are the goals of Christian parenting, because when I talk to some groups about parenting, you would think their goal is that their child will be instantly and perfectly obedient, and that they are a good parent when their child is instantly obedient. And we need to think about that. Is that really what we want our children to be like? That whatever anyone tells them to do, they will be instantly obedient, because that could get them into trouble as they get older, because they need to differentiate and think for themselves what is the right thing to do, because otherwise people can encourage them to do things that could be wrong and not helpful for them, because they will just do whatever anyone asks them to do without really thinking carefully about it. So yes, we would like our children to be obedient, but what's the most important thing? For me, I think it's raising children who have an active experience of God's love and forgiveness, and to raise children who are happy, kind, and loving, rather than someone that obeys me instantly, perhaps out of fear of punishment, or for some other reason. And this is so important for Christian parents, because we want our children to fall in love with God forever. And they learn who God is as a parent through the way that we parent them. And that makes it really important how we parent. So if we demand instant obedience and punish them when they don't obey instantly, they can develop a picture of a God who is not so caring, God that produces fear in their hearts, a God that is very exacting, and that can be really difficult for them. And we want them to experience a God of love, because God is pure love. Love in his heart is so big we cannot comprehend it. And I think it would take eternity to just begin to fathom what that love is like. And God created this whole world because he loved human beings and he wanted relationship with us. And he sent Jesus to show us his love. And the Bible tells us that God is love. All love comes from him. And when we let our hearts be filled up with his love, then we're better able to love God, to love others. And that wisdom can help guide us in our own parenting. So it's important to reflect on God's love and his patient discipline in our own lives. How has God led us in our life? How does he parent us? Because often we can see, as we look back, he's been really gentle and patient with us. And in 1 Corinthians 13, the very first principle of love is that it is patient and kind. And how does that shape how we discipline our children patiently and kindly? And I know patience can be very difficult when you're faced with a child who doesn't want to obey you, and you have to go somewhere and they won't do the things to get ready, and you just have to take them somehow. And so patience can be a real challenge for us as parents. And I used to wonder, why did Paul put patience first? And then I realized that when we are patient, when we slow down enough to listen to our children, to go at a comfortable pace for them. And when we go at their pace, when we listen to them, when we think about what their life is like, that patient listening, caring, watching helps us then to be the kindest we can be, because we know then what is needed. So I wonder how God has parented you in your life. I know for me, he has been incredibly kind. He has picked me up over and over again. He has put me over his shoulder and patted my back when I've cried. He's kissed my knees when I've done something stupid and hurt myself, and just picks me up and says, off you go, have another go, see what you can do this time. And I love that he is so gentle and accepting and kind in the way that he relates to me. And I know that's how he relates, because we can see how Jesus related to people when he was on earth, people who were struggling so hard to do the right thing, people that everyone else thought were getting it wrong. And he is patient, he is loving, he is accepting. And in that loving space, those people change their lives. Zacchaeus, the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery. Jesus' loving, patient, kind acceptance gives them hope, transforms them. They want to be something different than they are, something better than they are in the context of this amazing love that they are encountering. And how can Jesus be our example of a model parent rather than the imperfect models that we've all had of human parents? And actually, sadly, down through the ages, people, before we knew how to do research about children, before we had thought well about parenting and discipline, have often passed on some methods of discipline to us which are not really the best. And we need to stop and think, discern for ourselves. Is this the best way to guide my child? Is this the most loving thing to do? What kind of response does this behavior from me evoke in my child? So, as I mentioned before, love is patient and kind. It doesn't envy or boast. It's not proud. It doesn't shame others. It doesn't look out for itself and its own needs and what makes itself look good. It is not easily angered. Keeps no record of wrongs. How many times have I told you? Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Love never fails. And that's the kind of love. And that's bigger than any of us can do on our own. But there's the kind of love that really helps us as parents. It's good to have a picture we can keep going back to and learning from as we learn how to love and be patient. And that's a huge challenge for us. I think it's part of God's loving discipline of us that he sometimes gives us children that need loving discipline too, and he grows our character and develops us through as we patiently and kindly and struggle with some of the issues of parenting. And I know that I learned more about God and his love and his care and his guidance for me when I was parenting my own children. It really gave me new insights into just how much God loves and cares for us. And we are actually co-parenting God's child with him. Can you imagine that? You are co-parenting God's child. Wow. Our child is his child. How does he want us to treat his child? I was doing something with parents recently, and I was saying to them, imagine you are Mary and Jesus is your child, and you know your child is the Messiah. How would you treat them differently? How would you care for them differently? And our child is just as precious. And how would we think about parenting them the way God wants his child to be parented by us? So there are some parenting styles, and it's useful to have a quick look at these because they can tell us some really important things. So we have distant parenting, the kind of distant command, do this, do that, not so caring and loving and hands-on and close up and cuddly. It's more, I stand off over here and I tell you what to do, or I don't tell you what to do if I'm neglectful. So an authoritarian parent is very structured. There are lots of rules and they have to be kept, and there isn't a close relationship. Just do this because I say so, because I'm the parent. Yes, we've all maybe said that once in a while, but when that is the dominant style of our parenting and it's authoritarian, you will do this because I'm the parent, and there isn't the close connection. It develops children who feel angry and lonely. And we need to be aware of what that style of parenting elicits in our children. They can often become rebellious, or they may reject the parents altogether because they don't feel loved. They feel angry at them and they feel lonely. They don't feel there's the connection, the care that they need. Then we have parents who are distant and unstructured. There's no rules. There's not very much relational connection or any at all. The children can just do what they like, but there isn't the loving, caring nurture. And those children often become sad and lonely, depressed and lonely. So it creates a different kind of response in them. So we can see that these parenting styles actually affect the child's long-term well-being and possibly even their mental health. And then we have permissive parents who are warm and close. They absolutely love their children to bits. And because of that, they decide we're not going to have any rules. Our children can just do what they like and blossom and grow in this big space where they're free to discover themselves. And those children can feel very loved, but they can also feel very confused because they don't know what's expected of them. Children actually need some structure. We all do. If you went to work in a place and they just put you in an office and said, there you go, go and work, and they don't tell you what to do, how will you feel in that context? Very confused. Where do you start? What's expected of you? And you can imagine how that might feel. So that's what a child feels in that situation. It's very uncertain, and it doesn't feel safe that they can do anything they like, or they can lead the family. And the parent says, what shall we do today? What shall we eat today? What shall we wear today? And gives all the choice and responsibility to the children. The children that feel safest and loved and happiest are those where there's very warm, close parenting. They know for sure they're loved. And there's also some very clear boundaries to keep them safe, to keep them happy. They know that those guidelines are there for their well-being, and they're as few as possible. So this is called authoritative rather than authoritarian. And this kind of warm and loving with some loving guidelines helps children to flourish the best and feel safe and loved and happiest and manage their behavior. So I love this quote from Child Guidance, which was written, 150 years ago, I guess. If they would gather the children close to them and show that they love them and would manifest an interest in all their efforts and even in their sports, sometimes even being a child among them, they would make the children very happy, and they would gain their love and win their confidence. And the children would more quickly learn to respect and love the authority of their parents and teachers. So we can see from this that when a parent is loving and close and fun and shows an interest in the child loves that. They flourish. It gives them joy, like this little girl, and she's just full of joy and peace. You can see that in her cheeky little face. And she has learned to respect and love her mother in a beautiful way. God gently leads parents. It's the most challenging thing we do, parenting our children. And it's also the most amazing work anyone can do on this earth, I think. To be part of loving and shaping and nurturing the next generation is an incredible gift to society, to the community, to the world. We get the opportunity to shape lives with love. And I love this verse from Isaiah 40:11. When I was a young parent with small children, this gave me so much comfort. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young. And I love that because I see God is involved. He feeds our children and us. He gathers our children in his arms, carries them close to his heart to show them they are loved by him. And then he gently leads the parents, those who are with young, and doesn't expect great and fantastic things from us. He just says, let me walk slowly with you while you have these little ones, because if you try and rush around and do too much, it's not going to be good for you or for them. This is a time to be gently led and to go slowly. Kindness is the key, actually, to loving discipline. We see that in the parenting grid, that loving parenting kindness is really important to help children feel safe, to feel attached to us, to feel loved, and to have a safe space from which to work and live and make their choices. And again, the same Lady Ellen White says, let them be sparing of censure. Don't tell them off too much. Let kindness be the law of home and school. Let children be taught to keep the law of the Lord, and let a firm, loving influence restrain them. So it's love that can help them to make good choices. And actually, the more our children feel loved and the more that oxytocin pours into their brains, the easier it is for them to make good choices about their behavior, to take care of others, and to be kind and happy. Fathers and mothers, you are to represent God's disposition. You are to require obedience, not with a storm of words, but in a kind and loving manner. You are to be so full of compassion that your children will be drawn to you. The law of God in the home life and in the government of nations flows from a heart of infinite love. So all of the laws that God gives us, all of his boundaries come from his heart of infinite love for us, because he wants us to have the best lives possible and to be protected from the dangers that come from broken laws, broken relationships, and the things that, like murder, lying, coveting, all those things that are in the 10 Commandments. They're there to help us create communities of love. That's what's behind them all. So there is this distress cycle. If we don't feel cared for by God and others, if we're a child that feels neglected or that our parents are too overpowering, then we don't feel cared for. And what that does is it releases cortisol and adrenaline into the brain, which are stress hormones. And when they are pouring into our brain, it's like those times when, you just panic. Something happens and you panic, you feel afraid, and you go into fight or flight or freeze mode to deal with a situation. And so it just freezes the brain, and it blocks our ability to listen, to show empathy and be compassionate. Because when we are stressed, our body is just about protecting ourselves. It doesn't want to know what's going on for anybody else, because its focus is on, I need to keep you safe in this dangerous or threatening situation. So when that happens, and our brain, something comes down in our brain that shuts off our ability to make good decisions and to listen well and to be kind and compassionate and care for others, then we will hurt others by our words and actions, because the filter has been taken out, and we just do what we need to do to fight or to flight and run away, or just to freeze. So, and when we treat others in that way, then the cortisol and adrenaline gets released in their brains. So you can imagine the child doesn't feel cared for, they feel stressed, they kick out at their parents because they can't listen or show empathy or be compassionate. And when they do that, it triggers the parent often, and the parent gets frustrated and cross because they've been hurt by the child's words or actions. And so that blocks their ability to listen and show empathy and be compassionate. And we don't feel cared for, and then we struggle to care for our children too. So this goes around in a cycle. And it's important to be aware of this, because then you can see the importance of intervening in that if you would like to help your child behave in a different way. So there's a compassion cycle. And when we feel cared for and loved by God and others, oxytocin and dopamine is released into our brain, which helps us to listen to others, to show empathy, to be compassionate, and to care for people. And when we care for them, then those lovely hormones are released in their brain too. When they experience that care, it goes, ooh, wishy, wishy, wishy. And all this love feeling pours into their brain and helps them to be compassionate, empathic, and better listeners. And then as that happens, we're then able to care for others. So this goes in a cycle too. So we can see the importance of helping our children to feel cared for and loved, because it fills their brain with the oxytocin hormones, which helps them to be better listeners to us, what we're telling them to do, more empathic for others, so they'll be kinder and more compassionate. And their behavior, when they feel loved, it's much easier for them to manage their behavior. This is an important principle. And if you don't remember anything else, remember this one. We don't help children to behave better by making them feel worse. And quite a lot of parenting that has come down through the generations, even down towards my parents and my grandparents, was, punish the child. If you punish them harshly, then they won't do it again and they will learn good behavior. But we don't help children to behave better by making them feel worse. The worse they feel inside, the more distressed they are, as we found out from those cycles, the harder it is for them to manage their behavior well, to listen to us and be caring and compassionate, which is what we want. But the more they feel happy and loved, the happier and more loving they will behave. When inside they feel happy and good and loving, and love is being poured into them, it's so much easier for them to pour that back out again. So remember, if you make your child feel worse by shaming them, hurting them, punishing them, making them feel afraid, then actually what happens is you stimulate more challenging behavior, because when they're feeling bad inside, it's so difficult for them. It's almost impossible for them to behave in a way that can listen to us and that can respond appropriately. So the more caring connections we make with our children, and this is called attachment, the easier it is for them to behave well. So the more they feel loved and treasured and encouraged and comforted and appreciated, and that we give them attention, then we make all these bonds of love between us, and the easier it is for them to behave well. So love is connection, love is attachment, and we talk about attachment and bonding, but this breaks down into these positive things, comforting them when they're sad. That is so important, that we comfort our children quickly when they are distressed, because if we don't, their brains learn to react almost violently, instinctively, thoughtlessly, and they're less likely to learn how to pause and reflect and respond intelligently, appropriately, and warmly. So comforting them when they're sad as quickly as we can is actually really, really important to help their brains develop empathy for others and an ability to control themselves well in challenging situations. Also, they love acceptance, and especially when they've messed up. When a child knows they've done something wrong or they've broken something, they feel terrible. And when we can just scoop them up and say, we love you anyway, then, and we don't make a big fuss about what's been broken or what's gone wrong, that is so powerful to them. Affection, kindness, love, hugs, whatever love language they like, being told loving things, having the hugs, having little fun presents and surprises, whatever it is that helps them to feel loved. And then that really helps bond as well. Appreciation, thanking them for what they do right, noticing when they do things well, rather than just ignoring it because you're not being bothered by them at that time when they're being good. Tell them how much you appreciate them. Say how wonderful it is that they are focusing on the book or their activity or helping their little brother. Thank them. That is far more powerful than punishment and nagging to shape their behavior. Spot them doing something right and tell them how good a choice that is. And they just love that. That gives them a warm glow inside, and they want to please you again. Give them focused attention, not playing a game while you're on your phone with them or looking around when they're talking to you. Really give them some positive attention that tells them they are special and you love them. Give them respect as well. Don't shame them. Lift them up with dignity. Using shame as a punishment is really destructive for children and very frightening. And it can affect the way they respond to people their whole lives. So please don't use shame as discipline for children. Jesus would never do that. He never shamed people who were in difficult situations. He always lifted them up. He didn't judge their behavior or criticize them. Just let them know they were loved. And that's what helped them to make better choices. Encouragement is wonderful too, and helping them to feel safe and not frightened. Perfect love casts out fear. Being valued, knowing that we treasure them is so important, and that we're there to help them when they're struggling. Quite often we ask children to do things that we've never shown them how to do. We haven't taught them. And then we get frustrated when they can't do it. So be aware, support them, help them to do the things, come alongside them and let them learn the steps bit by bit until they grasp how to do it. So this shows you all the things that help children to feel warmly and lovingly attached and help them to behave well on the love and connected side. And on the lonely and disconnected side, these are behaviors from us that make it very difficult for them to feel loved, to manage their behavior, to flourish. It can overwhelm them. And the more of the lonely, disconnected things that happen in their life, the harder it is for them to behave well. So that's being hurt or judged, feeling rejected by us, abuse of any kind, shouting at them or hurting them, being criticized a lot, being punished a lot, being ignored, shamed, discouraged, afraid, being put down, being abandoned. All of these things are really destructive to children. It breaks the attachment bond. They learn not to trust us. They learn actually through that not to trust God as well. So we need to be aware of this. And if you want to take a picture of one slide, I'd say take a picture of this, because the more we fill our children with the love-connected actions, then the easier it is for them to behave and respond well and to become people who treat others in this positive way. Because when babies' needs are not met, all those lovely things don't happen. They experience neglect, pain, distress, sadness, aloneness, abuse. And then they start to think unhealthy thoughts. I'm not important. No one cares about me. What's wrong with me? Maybe if I try harder, they will love me. And then they feel unworthy, distressed, bitter, hurt, sad, lonely. And that can lead to addictions, manipulation, bullying, perfectionism, eating disorders, and poorer outcomes in relationships and in their education and in their mental illness as well. However, when we meet their needs from birth, they experience love, touch, time, attention, play, eye contact, smiles, comfort, all the lovely positive stuff that make babies laugh and giggle and shine. Then they have healthy thoughts. I am loved. I am special to others. I can do it. I am valued, confident, safe, thankful. I can love others well. I can be kind and helpful and considerate, and generous, and I can strive for excellence because I'm not troubled by all kinds of thoughts in my head. I know that I can do well. I have support to help me. And that lets them have more positive lives and relationships. Happier relationships. They grow a positive character. They have a good sense of self, a healthy sense of self, and a good ability to care for others. So loving and connected relationships like this help our children's brains to develop the skills of love and empathy, which make it easier for them to behave well. When they experience abuse or disconnection or the things on the negative side, it actually shapes their brains for aggression and violence. And this can happen up to the age from 0 to 3. This is happening in a child's brain. So the more loving connections they have from 0 to 3, then at 3, when we scan their brains are healthy, and the areas that help us be empathic and listen and care for others are well developed. When children under 3 experience abuse, disconnection, fear, being told off, being put down, shamed, hurt, then that area of their brain that should produce empathy has often shrunk. And sometimes there is just a black hole in that child's brain because the brain says, oh, empathy hasn't been useful. Let's just forget that area. It's clearly not a skill that's needed for life, because when babies are 3, their brains rewire and they cut out all the connections that didn't seem to be very useful and wire around them. And that's how many violent people are shaped in their brains from 0 to 3 by their experiences. So it's very important for us to know that, because it's very hard to reverse that once it's happened. So behavior is communication. Ask yourself, what is my child trying to tell me by their behavior? They might be telling me that they feel happy and loved and safe and they're flourishing. But when their behavior might give me concern, I have to ask myself, do they need something that I haven't given them? Maybe they need some food. Maybe they need to have a rest. Maybe they're overwhelmed and overstimulated by this environment and they can't handle it anymore. And believe me, that is really difficult for children when we take them into highly stimulating environments like supermarkets, theme parks, some play spaces that children have. There's so much going on that their brains can't filter it and they get overwhelmed, and then they can just burst into tears. That's why children often cry at birthday parties, because there's just too much information, too much happening, and they cannot manage all the information and they need to go and find somewhere peaceful to calm down. Sometimes children are telling us, I am confused, because we just take them into a situation without explaining it. And they have no idea what the expectations are, what is happening, what mommy and daddy are doing, what's going on. And we have failed to tell them, and they are confused. They don't know how to behave in a brand new situation. And we have forgotten to tell them and help them with that. And that's very difficult for them. They might be telling us, change something. Something isn't right here. I don't like this. There's a label sticking in the back of my neck in my clothes and I hate it. Take my top off. Or it's too hot in the car with the sun on my face. Change something. So they can't always tell us these things. They will just feel uncomfortable and distressed. And we have to work out what's going on. And they're trying to tell us, look, you're the grown-up, you're the parent, deal with it. I am just a vulnerable child. You need to take care of me. So we need to check our children's physical needs to help them behave well. I know that I struggle to be as nice as I'd like to be sometimes when I'm hungry. And so children struggle with that too. Make sure they're not hungry, make sure they're not thirsty, see if they're tired, are they feeling unwell? Do they need comforting and soothing? So check into those basic needs. And just because you're not hungry doesn't mean your child is not hungry. Their tummies are tinier and they can't fill up enough on everything they need if we have our meals too far apart. So check that they have their physical needs met. Make sure their senses are not overloaded, because today there are many children that have high sensitivity. That doesn't mean they're oversensitive and they cry a lot. They might cry because they're distressed by all the information in their environment that they can't manage. But really what they are is super aware. So they can hear more things, see more things, feel more things, and more intensely than other people, which means actually they are their sensory system is highly developed, and they're probably more intelligent, and they may not sleep as well. But this is a super skill, this awareness, when they learn how to manage it. But when they're very little, that's quite hard. So when their senses are overloaded and they cry or they get distressed, they're not being naughty. They just are so flooded with sensory information, they can't manage it all, and they just lose control, and they need a quiet space to calm down with you. So not every tantrum that you see a child have is a naughty tantrum. And quite often they're, I want to be with you tantrum, or I want some attention from you. And they're just asking us in a powerful way for their basic needs. Or they can be just so overloaded. They're telling us, look, take me somewhere to calm down. I cannot tolerate this anymore. And I had an illness in my life when I got to taste what this was like. And a supermarket was the very worst place for me to be, because my senses were overloaded in a strange way. And I really could not cope with being in a supermarket. So I understand how hard that is for a child. So tantrums can be from sensory overload, a desperate need for attention from parent, adult, not able to make themselves understood in other ways or express themselves. They don't have the language to say what they need, and then it all gets too much. Or they can be frustrated, afraid, or tired, or have other powerful feelings that they can't express. Or they can be trying to control the parent and get what they want. And it's the one where they're trying to control the parent that is the one that needs to be carefully managed. When that is happening and a child is throwing a tantrum because they want something, my daughter will say to her children, you know, I can't understand you when you talk in that voice like that, in that baby voice. So if you want something, I want you to calm down and talk to me in your big girl or big boy voice, and then we can think about it. And if she has to say, we can't do that today, she will say, I know you want that very much. I know it means a lot to you, but today is not a day where we can do that. And I'm really sorry. And I'm going to help you with your distress by holding you and hugging you, because I know it's hard for you. But today is not the day for that. We can't do that today. And I know that's difficult. So she shows empathy and concern for them, and she hugs them and she helps them to calm down again and get a handle on their behavior. So when we're asking our children to do something, it's really important to make sure they've really understood, because sometimes we tell children to do things and we think, oh, they understand what that means, and they have no idea. So go and put your shoes on, for example, a common command from a parent, a request. And what does that mean? Go and put your shoes on. So the child goes, and there's loads of shoes, and like, which shoes? And put a different shoe on each foot. Are they on the right feet? You know, there's so many different challenges just in saying, go and put your shoes on. Where are the shoes? Is there a matching pair? And so it's important to make the request carefully and clearly and make sure they understand it. So get their attention. Hey, just touch them gently. Hey, look into their face and make eye contact and smile, so you know they have their full attention. Then tell them calmly and simply what you need them to do. Please go downstairs and find your blue shoes. Or you might just say, please go downstairs. And when they get downstairs, now find your blue shoes. So tell them one thing at a time if they're really young, because they can't remember two things. So don't say, go and do this and this and this, because they will just get overwhelmed by information and confused. I mean, you made it harder for them to obey anything when you tell them lots of things at once, particularly when they're little. Then check they've understood the request. So what do you need to do? You need to go downstairs? Yep. And you need to find your shoes. Yep, that's right. And when we lower our tone and smile and talk gently and show confidence they're going to follow through, that really, really helps them. When we shout at them, even if we're telling them what to do and we're not shouting angrily, and we haven't given them eye contact, we're calling from a distance, then we actually, again, make it really harder. They hear the shout as something that they've done something wrong, and they get stressed by our shout, and then it makes it harder for them to follow through. So when we're calm and when we smile at them as well, that really helps them to behave better. So support, encourage them, remind them patiently if they become distracted, and thank them warmly when they've completed the task. You know, it's really important to make sure they understand the task, because I had a very good example of this when my children were little. I left my 4-year-old son in the living room with his 1-year-old brother who was toddling around. And I needed to leave them for just a couple of minutes while I ran out to the garage, got something for lunch and ran back in again, because our freezer was in the garage. There wasn't room for it in the house. So I said, Nathan, come here. See Joel here. I want you to watch your baby brother while I go out and get some food from the freezer. I could only have been gone 2 minutes. When I came back, Joel had tipped over a large yucca plant in the corner of the room. He had pulled it across the carpet, and the plant had come detached from the plant pot, and there was a trail of dirt across our pale carpet. And then Joel was sitting on the carpet, teething on the yucca plant, like a beaver chews on a tree or something. And I surveyed this devastation, like, how could this happen in 2 minutes? And I took it all in, and I took a deep breath, and I thought, I am not going to yell at my son. I'm just going to ask him what happened, because that's a good thing to do. What happened is the most helpful comment. So Nathan, what just happened? And he said, you told me to watch my little brother, and I watched him. And he was so funny, because in his mind, watching was like you watch television. You just sit there and see it happen. You don't intervene. You don't stop it. And in my mind, watching was take care of, look after, a different kind of meaning for the word. And so hence we had quite a big mess. But I wasn't cross with them, because he was doing his best. I hadn't made the command clear, and I had no idea a 1-year-old would do that. And actually, maybe it was my fault for leaving the plant there in the first place. Fortunately, everything cleaned up, vacuumed up, and yucca plants, whatever he was chewing on wasn't toxic to him, and nobody suffered. But I learned an important lesson. They're still learning. Can they do what I expect them to do? Because sometimes we ask children to do things that they are not developmentally able to do yet. And that is so frustrating for them when we ask them to do something that is not possible for them. And if someone asked you to do something that was physically impossible for you and then punished you when you couldn't do it, I wonder how you would feel. And also, when children are afraid of punishment, they don't learn well. If fear is in their brain, they cannot learn a new task. They can't even listen well to what we're telling them to do, because fear will overwhelm their brain and stop them listening. I love the Jewish concept. I have a Jewish friend, and she said, you know what? We don't get too troubled about the behavior of under 12s. They are still learning. If they get something wrong, if they make a mistake, it's because we haven't taught them well enough how to behave well. Once they're 12 and they have their bar mitzvah or their bat mitzvah, that means then they come under the law, and their behavior is their responsibility. It's our responsibility to be better teachers so that they learn well while they're younger. Keep it simple. You know, children are easily overwhelmed by too many choices, and the more toys they have, the less they focus on them. They don't really play with them well. So I have watched children who have dozens of toys all over the floor, and they'll flit from one to the other, and they don't really focus on their motor skills, on their attention skills, on their coordination skills. They just like spin around from one thing to the next, and they don't have really good quality learning play. You know, if I was to parent all over again now, my children would only have 10 toys at a time, and the others would be put away. And they would go and choose 10 toys each week that they wanted to play with. And this would mean there were less toys, easier to clean up for everybody, easier storage, simpler for them to sort things out and to put things away. And also they would focus more appropriately on the few toys that they have rather than being distracted by everything. So keep your life simple and use some techniques like that to make it easier for children to manage their clothes, their toys. The fewer that's around, the easier it is for them to put them away, and you too. And pace your schedule. You know, God gently leads those that have young, and sometimes we're trying to do so much, and some parents don't have a choice. They have to do a lot of things to work and to take care of their children, and life is really challenging. But the simpler we can make the life that we do have control of, then the easier it is for us. So it's important to remember that children sometimes tell us difficult truths. And when they tell us a difficult truth about what they've done, we need to be gentle with them, because it takes great courage for them to tell us the truth when they've broken something, when they've done something wrong, when they've disobeyed us and a mistake has happened. And warmly thank them for having the courage to tell us the truth, and then help them to fix the problem that's happened. Because if we punish them harshly because they have lied to us, they will learn to lie to prevent future punishment or to get out of difficult situations. It's also important to remember that young children will make up stories that are not lies. They just make up a story they think we want to hear to please us. And we need to differentiate between that and a lie. And also, if I remember someone coming in telling my child, "You've stolen my pen." And they were using the person's pen, but they had not stolen it. They just found it and they just picked it up, and they needed a pen, and it was the nearest pen. And so when the person accused them of stealing, they were really upset. Like, "I didn't steal it, but you have it. You must have stolen it." And the child is very confused. So we need to be careful of the language we use and how we ask them questions. "So how did you get that pen?" "Well, I just found it on the floor and I needed a pen, so I just used it." And so if you ask them in a question like that, "Where did you get that?" And then that can help them to tell you what really happened. So don't jump to the negative conclusions quickly, and help them to tell the difficult truths well, because when they can tell us the difficult truths well when they're little, they can come to us with all sorts of bigger difficulties when they're older. And we really want to have that connection then when something big has happened and they really need us to be there and help them with a difficult situation. You know, quite often people want to, they talk to me about physical punishment. Well, you know, can we hit our children? What's okay, what's not okay? Well, there are some things we need to understand about physical punishment. It creates fear. If someone hurts you, if your boss hit you, you'll be afraid. You have to think, would you want to go back and work there if someone hit you because you did something wrong? What would that do to you? What would you think? How would you want to respond to that person? Now, just imagine you're an adult, and when we hit a child, what does that do for them? It creates fear. And perfect love does not cause fear. They're incompatible. So if we punish children in a way or discipline them in a way that causes fear, that's a really big challenge for them, because fear and love come from the same person, and that can leave them feeling very confused and conflicted and insecure and not know who to trust. It also teaches the child that it's okay to hit people who don't do what you want them to do. So they see that they didn't do what you asked. They get hit, and therefore they see, oh, it's okay to hit other people who don't do what we want them to do. And that can set a pattern that makes it easier for them to be violent towards others who don't do what they want. It builds anger, resentment, and rebellion in a child's heart, because physical punishment is often shaming and painful and fearful. And then that leads to the anger response, the fight, flight, freeze response, the trauma response, that makes it harder for them to behave better in the future. Also, it doesn't on its own teach a child any positive behavior or self-control. It just teaches them that it's okay to hit people who don't do what you want. And it distorts a child's picture of God as a punitive parent rather than a loving and forgiving father. And sometimes people say to me, well, the Bible says spare the rod and spoil the child. But remember that shepherds never use their rods to hit sheep, because if a shepherd hit a sheep, he would not be able to control his sheep. They would just run away from him. It would be so difficult to be a shepherd. So the sheep must never be afraid of the shepherd. That's a really important rule. So the shepherd will not hurt them. Perfect love casts out fear. It doesn't create fear. And in Psalm 23, we see that the shepherd's rod is used to comfort, to guide through the dark place, to be held next to the cliff so the sheep doesn't fall over the edge, to hook them out of a ditch if they've fallen into them, to set a safe boundary, to keep them safe, to fight off the attackers. So the rod is not used to hurt the sheep, it's used to protect them, to guide them, to keep them safe. And that's the important aspect of discipline. It's to guide, protect, keep them safe, show that we love them and care for them. So if something is incompatible with that, it's not healthy discipline. So what we need to do is to create some clear boundaries in our children's lives, and just a few at a time. Just try and focus on one or two at a time, because if you have too many rules, the children cannot manage them all. It's just too much. So choose what's most important. Show what it looks like, explain why it's important, and check the child understands and recognizes the boundary. So rather than just say, don't do this or do this, stop and explain it. So for example, I would take my son Joel when Nathan went to football practice, and we'd be in the same park, and there'd be a line like this around the football pitch. And I would say to Joel, it's very important that we stay away from that boundary. So word it positively, we stay away from, because positive language is easier for a child to understand. If we say don't do something, that's very confusing for them. They don't know what to do. They just know what not to do. And they often don't hear the not, they hear the do. So it's very confusing when we use negatives. So Joel, we're going to stay on this side of the boundary, well away from the edge. And this is the boundary, this white line. And it's important because if we get near that line or you go over it, you will bump into the people playing the game, and they'll be really cross with you, and you or them might get hurt. And you might get shouted at because it spoils the game. So we stay this side of this line. And where is the line? Show me the line that we must stay away from. And then he will go and point the line. So I know he understands what it is. And what should we do? We should stay over here, well away. Yes, that's right, Joel. That's what we need to do. So make it easy to stay away within that boundary. So we can say, let's play over here, Joel, well away from Nathan's game, so that we can play safely with our ball and kick it around, and there's no danger it's going to get into the football game. And then enforce it warmly, gently, and consistently, and give them positive attention when they're doing it well. Yes, Joel, that's right. Let's keep the ball right over here. Kicking it this way is the best thing to do, so it doesn't get into that game. Well done. And then, knowing Joel, he's going to get a little bit nearer that line. He's just going to see, he's just going to test it and see what I will say when he gets near it. And when I see him getting near, I say, Joel, remember where we need to stay. We need to stay over here, don't we? So we don't get involved in the game, rather than yelling at him. Joel, don't go there, don't do that. You're just going to, you've forgotten. That's shaming and disrespectful, and other people might be hearing that and he might feel bad. So enforce it warmly, gently, and consistently. Joel, come and stay over here. Help them by your warmth and your gentleness to want to do it right, because the oxytocin is in their brain and they can listen better, and that you are happy with them and you love them when they're doing the right thing. And that's really, really important. So it's very important. If he does cross that boundary, if he does intentionally cross it, to see what I do, to be defiant, then that's when it's really important to show discipline, because it's not an accident. It's not his lack of skills or awareness or his lack of development. It was an intentional rebellion. And that's the most important time, when a child has intentionally and rebelliously crossed a boundary that you knew they understood and that they can keep, and they know why it's there. And that's when that rebellion needs to be dealt with. So how do we do that? Well, when a child has done that, so Joel runs into the football game, the whistle blows, the referee gets cross, and everyone's mad at him. And that's often enough discipline in itself, because that's what we call natural consequences. If he runs into the game and messes it up, someone is going to yell at him and shout at him. And what I would do then is say, okay, Joel, if you cannot manage that boundary, if that was difficult for you, I won't be taking you with me when I go to the game with Nathan. I'll wait until you can manage that boundary better. So we'll have to practice that another time and until you can learn. Well, when they have done something that we need to correct, we need to connect first to show that we care, to show that we love them. That's the most important thing. And it's really hard because often the first thing we want to do, because we've been pushed into our fight and flight and fright mode, and we just want to at them for doing what they've done. We need to take some breaths, and it can be hard, but try and connect first. Even if you can't say something, just kind of be gentle, hold them, take some deep breaths, calm yourself down, pray, and help yourself to get into a better place. It's really important to let them know that we're connected with them, that we love them, so they feel safe, because otherwise they can't listen to anything else. They need to feel safe with us and loved and accepted before we can help them with their behavior. So we need to calm down and make that connection with them. And the quicker we make that connection, the better, because the longer a child lives with the threat of a broken relationship with us, they don't know if we will ever reconnect with them again. And that is really frightening. And that can really make it harder for them to manage their feelings and their actions, because they are so afraid. So if we connect with them first and say, oh, come here. I know that's scary, that you broke the window, that you felt so angry. That was quite scary. So let's come here and let me tell you, I love you anyway. Let's just sit here. Let's take some deep breaths or blow some bubbles, and let me just put my arm around you while we just sit here quietly and think about things. And so respond to their emotions, comfort their sadness, and listen to their story. Help them to calm down by being calm. And it's not easy. It's not always easy for us to do this. And if we get it wrong, if we lose it, then we can take some breaths and come back and say, I am so sorry. I should not have behaved like that. I want to behave better. And I want to let you know that I care. And together we can both learn how to manage our behavior better. So stay relationally and warmly connected through the process of redirecting or correcting them. And if we made a mistake, apologize, because that teaches them how to ask for forgiveness well. Effective discipline helps the child to name which boundary was broken and to understand why it was difficult. So if they broke a boundary, so they played with their cricket ball too close to the house and you told them not to, and they threw it and it broke a window, that helps them to understand what happens when they break the boundary, and that they need to make sure that won't happen again. They need us to show them warmth and love and acceptance so they don't feel abandoned and disconnected, which makes it frightening for them, and help them to put things right. Time in with our children, connected with them, is often far more helpful than time out from them. So if often the people say, oh, give the child some time out to think about what they've done, but they can feel very alone in that space. It can be very frightening for them. My husband has a terrible story of when he experienced a timeout in his family, and it was one of the most emotionally devastating experiences of his childhood. And because he needed time in, he needed to know that he was still loved and connected, because it's frightening when they do something wrong and we reject them powerfully and they don't know if they're ever going to be reconnected with us. So it's important to manage that carefully and understand what's going on in their brain and help them to sort it out, even if they pay a little bit towards the window, to feel, if they can feel they've somehow helped to repair the situation, it also helps to restore their self-esteem and their well-being. So pray for wisdom to respond well, especially in those moments when you just feel highly triggered and angry. Find a good time very soon to connect with them, to talk calmly and privately about what went wrong, what happened there. Don't ask why. They won't know. It's complex and they will make up a story that isn't useful, because all sorts of things contribute to why a child cannot manage their behavior well and steps outside the boundary. It's a lot of complex, challenging emotions or tiredness or other things that happened in their life that day at school, and they just can't manage things anymore. So ask what happened instead, because that's clearer. They saw what happened. My friend threw the ball and then I hit it back and I was angry, so I hit it in the wrong way. It was just an accident, whatever. Just ask what happened instead of why. Then effective discipline uses natural and logical consequences. The discipline is linked to the wrongdoing. So if they run into the football pitch and they don't keep that boundary, then the natural consequence, as I said, is they don't go when their brother's playing football until they've learned to manage that boundary well. If they have a cookie before dinner and they shouldn't, then they don't get one afterwards. And this is how life works. If you drive too fast, then you pay a fine or you have your car taken away. If you steal something, you go to prison. So the world is full of natural and logical consequences. If you take something, you need to pay it back. If you don't pay your rent, you don't get to stay in the house. And so the sooner they learn that their behavior has logical consequences, that's the most important thing. So wherever possible, the discipline needs to be linked to the natural and logical consequences of the wrongdoing. So if an older child stays out too late at a party, a teenager, and you said come in by 10 and they stay out till 11, and you say, well, clearly you can't manage that boundary yet. So, the next time you will have to come back at 9 or not go, and until you can learn to come back on time, because that's important principle for us and your safety and your well-being. So ask older children what would be a logical discipline for their misbehavior. And say, what do you think? What do you think would be the logical discipline for what you've done? Invite them into that conversation. Put things right, help them to pay for things they break. If they hurt someone, get them to do something nice for someone they've hurt. And that's also an important thing with younger children. If they fight and hurt one another, they both must do something kind for each other. Or if one hurt the other one, then the one who hurt must do something kind for the other. That's also a natural, logical consequence. We want to teach kind behavior and not hurtful behavior. So if you do something hurtful, you have to do something kind to repay it, so that is the reinforced behavior. Catch them doing something right. Philippians 4:8 says, give special attention to your children when they're behaving well. So you've played happily with your brother for 10 minutes. Choose a book and I'll read to you. Notice their character strengths and tell them when they made a good choice, when they were kind, when they persevered, when they were a good team player. So look and see what they're doing well and tell them that, because that really powerfully, it's almost the most powerful thing you can do to help them behave well, is to tell them when they've done well and made a good choice. And just your positive smile, loving reinforcement is very powerful in their lives. And this is my prayer for you, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Because the more that our love can abound, and the more that we learn actually about how to discipline our children well, so that we have the insight, then it's easier for us to help them with their behavior and also with ours. And for those times when we mess up and we don't get it right and we do things we'd rather not, we can always go and ask our Father in heaven for forgiveness and for help. And he will always love us and pick us up again and give us a new opportunity. And he's always there to help us through those difficult moments, because we are co-parenting his child, and he's interested in their well-being and in your well-being as we do this together. I'm going to pause now, and this is the end of the webinar. We'll stop the recording now and we can have a discussion.